Hi there and welcome to Project Hospital. In this series, I'm putting real healthcare planning and guidelines into the design of my hospital, and I'm seeing how this fares against real game mechanics. Today's episode is our final build episode before we open the doors, so that's all of the remaining wards and the intensive care unit going in today. However, before we get going, there's one massive problem that I didn't account for and I'd like to explain. So, when you're building in Project Hospital, when you build a new floor, it copies the tiles from the floor below. So it copies the entire footprint of the building, and you can't change that. So where I've had overhanging wings on the lower floors, basically I'm stuck with having the same footprint on the upper floors. My plan with this hospital was to have a large footprint spanning pretty much the entire space available on the ground of the second floor, where you get some of the departments that aren't the hospitalisation inpatient parts. Then the upper floors where the inpatient wards are, I wanted this to be in a sort of L shape with a much smaller footprint, so you have a good ratio of walls and windows, making the environment much brighter, which is much better for promoting a healing environment. The game gives us 5 floors to play with in the base game, and that would have been plenty to design the hospital in this way, but with how the buildings work in the game, it won't let me delete the foundations of the upper floors, meaning I've had to fill the space on the 3rd floor completely. In future builds, to get the design I want, I'll have to work out the build from the top down. So place the core of the building with the elevators in place on the ground floor, then start on the top floor with the footprint I want, and work my way down so you don't get these ugly overhangs of flooring where they shouldn't be. I mean, this is what I encountered with the game, but if anyone has a workaround for this or knows a way of deleting flooring entirely from upper floors, let me know in the comments, otherwise it'll mean carefully planning out everything beforehand. Anyway, on to today's build. So this first section I'm building is the intensive care unit. This is situated right above the operating theatres. Throughout this build, I've tried to section out departments based on the level of care needed. So the ICU is on the top floor because in my experience, ICUs tend to be on higher floors because there's much less foot traffic. Intensive care needs to be in quieter areas of the hospital, both for noise reduction, stress for patients and those visiting, and to reduce the risk of infection and contamination. However, the unit needs to be easy access for transferring patients from critical wards, and also close by the A&E trauma unit and the operating theatres. So in this build, I've got this set of elevators in the corner of the hospital here, and they're pretty much dedicated to moving patients around that need that higher level of care. I'm hoping once I open the hospital, the AI will recognise this and use these elevators for those purposes. So the intensive care unit, I've set up 3 wards with 4 beds in each. The nurse's station and the doctor's office is right outside as well, so any emergencies will be dealt with straight away. My plan with this 3rd floor, all of the staff facilities are placed in the centre of the building with the wards around the outside of this. This makes it easier for the staff to get to any of the wards, whilst it's keeping patient corridors separated where possible. So moving on to this next section, this is where I'm building the high dependency wards. Like in the last episode, instead of grouping wards by what department they sit under, I've grouped them by what function they do, as this offers greater benefits to the patient flow through the clinical care pathways. I'll be honest, the ward setup in this game is a little frustrating in that you need separate wards for each of the different departments. In a real hospital, this might not be the case. Obviously, patients at risk, like those immunocompromised or with mental health issues, they will have separate wards obviously, or even private rooms in some cases. But for the departments we have in this game, I don't see any reason why they couldn't share patient wards, including the high dependency units. So instead of grouping each department's wards together, I've separated them out by function. So here I'm grouping all the high dependency wards together right next to the intensive care ward. I've got 1 high dependency ward with 4 beds each for each department, and I feel like 4 is enough, on top of the regular wards and intensive care. It should be enough. You'll notice the layout of my wards tend to take the same form, with only variations being where they're needed to conform with the shape of the building. There's a bed with equipment it needs around it, a chair and a privacy screen, and each ward has a private sink in the corner and a private toilet. Realistically, each washroom would be a little bit larger than I've given room for, as they would need to have accommodations for disabilities, so wider door, disability fixtures and fittings around the toilet and sink, but for purposes of gameplay, I've set them up as they are as normal toilets. It would be nice if the game did add features at some point that are for disabled patients, so maybe some ramps here or there, and obviously wider doors, and fixtures and fittings around the place that help people with disabilities get up and about. It's also interesting that they only went down the stretcher route and you don't see any wheelchairs anywhere. In a normal hospital, you have orderlies that normally transport patients via stretcher, or in most cases it's by a wheelchair. The stretchers should be for the really poorly patients. All the other patients should be carried about on a wheelchair. Anyway, here I've moved on to building the regular wards. Each department has about 8 to 10 beds split between rooms of 2, 3 or 4 beds, depending on the size constraints of the building. I feel like when the game gets running, I think the majority of patients will be in regular wards, hence why there's more beds for them than the high dependency. The layout of regular wards is pretty similar to the high dependency. Each has a toilet in the room, and every room has plenty of natural light from a number of high windows. I've also made sure each regular ward has a doctor and nurse station close by, and it has its own cleaning cupboard. That should make it nice and easy for janitors to keep up with cleaning here. Where possible, the regular wards for each department are in close proximity via elevators to the outpatient diagnosis rooms of each of these departments. That means when a patient is seen as an outpatient and they're admitted to hospital for further investigation, they don't have to go far to get to their hospital room. I like the idea of this. I mean, in a real hospital, this isn't always possible since you often have mixed wards serving patients with various ailments. But it's a really nice idea that I think real hospitals would implement if they had the room for it and the capability. It's a good point actually. I had a comment on one of my videos last week that was asking about the differences in this layout compared to hospitals around the world. Now, I'm only familiar with the rules and guidelines for the build of hospitals in the UK, so regulations will vary country to country, but with the same base principles. Healthcare buildings need to be clean, safe and easy to run and manage, without compromising the health of those being cared for or the clinicians carrying out the care. Particular attention is paid to the design features that help minimise the risk of infection, features that promote a healing environment and that improve the patient journey. I feel like I've addressed all of this in this build. Granted, there are some errors here or there or things that I couldn't change, such as not having shared wards, and I'm still amazed at the lack of stairs in this game. Also to note, the build I've got here, this is my take on a new build hospital that has the freedoms to apply all these controls. Often real hospitals don't have the luxury of a full new build. They have to make do with a refurbishment, which brings its own problems with things like the configuration of rooms and corridors having to make do with whatever is already there. You can strip back a hospital to the brick to put in new features and new wards, but you can't take away things like supporting walls. There's usually an awful lot of complexities to do with the heating, ventilation, and the mechanical and electrical services as well. Also, building in a live hospital environment, where part of the hospital is shut down but the rest is still operational. That has a heap of complications to ensure that the open part of the hospital can operate safely and effectively during the build, but that's a different story entirely. This bit of the build, I decided to try out the new feature of shared rooms, with this big common room for all staff on the 3rd floor. There's plenty of space, so I'm keen to see if staff actually use it properly. And that's pretty much it for this build. That's every department built, all rooms and technical equipment is in. All that's left to do now is hire staff and open the doors. Join me next time when we open the hospital and see how effectively it runs. I just really hope the AI in this game is intelligent enough to have this running well. I hope you've enjoyed this build, and as always, let me know what you think in the comments. Until next time, thanks for watching, bye for now.